Looking at this a day and a half of discussions, and we will take questions for Juan, for Idalina and JP as well, but looking back at the reviews, what are our takeaways? We added a small subtitle to the moderation at ease, how we can close the gap between work as done versus work as imagined. How we can close the gap between all the strategic, practical, and what we execute in tactics. And if you allow me, we just put up a couple of slides to animate our imagination. And I think the issue why we have that, it's normal because our systems are socio-technical systems. And whenever you put human beings together with the technicalities, things like you will see in these slides are happening. This is a normal pedestrian crossing, and these people, they thought because maybe the accidents, there will be a flow of people, of students coming out of the university and crossing that. What do you think is the reality? What the people will do? Will do, well, what exactly you do with the flight plans and the operation. Whoops, not that one. Okay. The guys will just cross on the right, yeah, and they will just bypass the barriers. So this is what will happen. So actually, and what can we do from getting our, everything, the ducks are in the rows, the operation is planned, but in fact the messy reality is this. So how we can close the gap between the work as imagined and the work as done. So your takeaways, going back to the discussion, going back to the points. Certainly we'll have Ken at the end in summarizing at least what from our side is our takeaways. But we promise you can leave you out without some takeaways and further things that we have not read from the cards and from the points that you raised earlier. Any thoughts, views at the end? We have about 45 minutes before we close. Yes.
Speaking about the culture, I'm Kjell Larsen from Air Support, one of the CFSPs. We haven't spoken much here these last 2 days. I'm basically here because it looks very much like an aircraft operator, an ANSP issue, and we didn't really believe that we could do very much, but I'm not sure anymore. Aer Lingus talked about culture, so did Joe, so did everybody else. Confidence, predictability, and keeping the network view in focus. The CFSPs will enable the aircraft operators to provide a perfect plan according to the RATs, and I'll come back to that. Based on the plans, network manager will, with the aid of the ANSPs and the FMPs, be able to make the perfect capacity planning. And that is more or less where our influence ends, because then we send the flights in the air and no airlines, no CFSPs, no operation control centers are able to influence the flights very much once they're airborne. Neither is network management, by the way. It is in the hand of the pilots and the controllers. The pilots believe that the controllers know what they're doing. The controllers believe that the pilots know exactly what they're doing. I'm not sure any of it is really true, but that's where we had to change the culture. But also reminding that there's a gap between the planning and the execution. And on that subject, I believe that many of the RATs introduced, making it complex to produce flight plans. Many of the RATs introduced are introduced due to flight execution. Some idiot is making a sharp turn, so the ANSPs will make a RAT that prohibits the sharp turns, which in turn makes it more difficult to plan because of all the RATs, and then we have a vicious circle which will never end. But our effort requires less complexity. That's how we can do sensible flight plans. Most of the flight plans produced by the AOs are never seen by a human being. 80% are automated and filed, and nobody ever sees them until the pilot suddenly notices that the FMS indicates a big triangle which he hadn't really seen when he received the flight plan, and which he's not going to get anyway. So I'm advocating for a little bit of conscience on the RAT introduction based on stupid flight execution and not bringing it into the flight planning and making it more complex. That was actually just my thought on the adherence, and that's it.
Thank you for that. So if I can summarize, simplify RADs and less complexity, please. Yes, DSNA, please.
Just a remark, or it was another question, but just a remark of the previous intervention. Yes, it's good to simplify RAD, but please look at the flight plan, otherwise we enter again the vicious circle. But I think together, little by little, we'll improve that. And another, I've got two questions, most of them for CFSP or AOs, or both of them. You presented, Juan, you presented a change in the NM23 and the possibility to test in the Iraq +1 or +2, the change and the flight plan. And so does it mean it's going to be possible for most CFSP and most AOs to test the ENM RAD new measures? Because NM23 will arrive beginning of April, and if I do remember well, the ENM measure will be set up at the end of April.
I have a question to that.
First, a reaction from Juan, or you collect the questions. Let's first, okay, questions. And
It was a question also to the CFSPGs, René Vierke presenting Lufthansa Systems for lead of flight. As far as we read the release notes, it's foreseen to enable this functionality explicitly only for the knob, but not for B2B services. So if it's not in the B2B services, there's no way for us to implement it.
Okay. Thanks for the
Juan?
I answer both questions. So in the first one, which is that possible for next summer? So I guess that's the question from you.
And before the beginning of
yes,
the year, of course.
Before April and perhaps in March. The release has a timeline, but we had a discussion yesterday in order to for you to be able to access the OPTs and perhaps to access the OPTs with the data which is relevant for the project that will change the environment for next summer. So we are starting an action here in NNM. We'll give you an answer in the coming days. On the second question, if the release notes today state that it's only available via NOB, we will have to review the release notes because it's not according to the requirements that we had in the release process, and we will come back to you as well on that.
Okay, does it mean it will be available for the B2B and it's just a misprint in the release notes, or is it not yet confirmed?
It was a scope to be available in the B2B as well, but we will confirm to you in the coming days, and we will adjust the release notes if it's necessary.
Another question, but not linked to, and thank you for the answers. So perhaps it's going to be good news, so that's a good thing. And another question, not linked to the first one, but also in your presentation, you said that there's going to be a change in allocation ATFM delay with DPI messages. I suppose it's when TOBT push your flight, because you want to push your flight, something you delay 30 minutes after because you're not ready, and that flight had a CTOT, so in the allocation delay we had an issue before. I think you're talking about that, and what will be the exact way or procedure method, and is it possible to have a note, if there is one, to have an explanation of how it's going to be calculated and attributed?
I know the answer to the question, but I think I let Jet to introduce the intention of the change, and then we can give more details on how it is computed.
Okay, yeah, so again, we've gone back several years. There's been various delay calculation task forces, one of which produced the ready message change and change to delay calculation. One of the others was due to this particular issue that was mentioned, and the intention. I think there was another delay calculation task force. So essentially, it's simplistically within some of the DPI messages, the DPIS messages, there is information that effectively says there's an off-block uptime by the airline, and it's sort of buried. So we're trying to take benefit of that at the moment. The delay calculation from the when it's CDM airport specific is not taking benefit of that information. So that's the intention. Where we know it's an update, the calculation is fixed on. I think it's the
It will be really based on. It will be reduced. It will be based on the CTOT which is assigned to the flight, but compared to the last TOBT information, which is not the case today. So that will be adapted, and as a result, the portion which is allocated to the en route part is adjusted based in a more rational operational way.
So in fact, you will base your calculation, it's going to be CTOT minus TOBT plus taxi time, something like that.
The last one, yes.
The last
Yes.
TOBT plus last taxi time.
Perhaps.
I do suppose.
Yeah.
And I think the main push has come from the ANSPs. When they regulate, they see their delay a bit more than necessary. So we're just sort of basically delivering what the various calculation task forces have asked for.
Okay, thanks.
Jenny, you wanted to say no?
So I'm happy that this is going to be fixed, so we will see also the realistic delay and not artificially changed.
Yeah, the thing is not changed, but it was not only a MUAC team, and I know most of the ACC, when they discovered it, it was a bit difficult for it, but thanks.
Yeah, I have a question for Jean-Pierre, coming back to his architecture slide and where the future is moving. We know for both policy and historical architectural reasons, your current human-machine interface modules are deeply embedded in the system, which means there is a discrepancy between release of what's available via an API, so speak B2B versus the other one, and my colleague René has already mentioned that. Obviously we want to make sure that you always release the B2B capability at the same time, or even before that. Architecturally, and I couldn't see that from your diagram, do you plan in future to design your system such that your own UIs are put on top of an API layer and we interface with the same API layer, so that the CFSPs have access to everything that your UI has access to as well? Or is the architecture in that sense going to remain as it is today?
GP?
Yes. First question. Yes, the ambition, and this is our strategy as well, is to have the same capabilities from an HMI standpoint than from a B2B standpoint. So, for example, we discussed that we are a little bit behind in terms of the flow messages, specifically to provide the regulation information and so on. So we are working on that. But this is the goal. The goal is to make available, and obviously we have a genuine interest in doing that, because we see that by providing more of those interfaces via system-to-system web services, for you, for the ones that have already made the step, the technology step, to be able to interface like that, for you, it's a lot of benefits, operationally speaking, from an automation standpoint, performance standpoint, and so on. For NSPs, I think they have also realized it is very interesting. For example, I remember SkyGuide, when they were able to send us via B2B the runway change. Then it was also interesting for us because they did not have to enter it in the HMI and into their system for us to know that type of change. So to be sure, everything that is developed on HMI will be developed on a B2B. So that's the first point. Second question is, are we going to have in the new architecture the same interfaces for the HMI to present the information and for the B2B? I'm not sure. And I'm not sure when I say that, it's not because we are not going to provide, as I said, we will provide the same type of capabilities, B2B or HMI, but it depends on the type of HMI information that we want to provide. And as you know, the graphical interface that you want to show, depending on the technology, may vary from the standard web service that we provide. I'm not sure that we go, if it is your question, to full REST to provide whether to the HMI or to the B2B. This is not yet decided, okay?
And that's, unfortunately, Joe is not here at the moment, but then my recommendation would be, yes, can you please do that? It also creates a level playing field, right? We all then have the same interface, and I think that would encourage the users that are here to move over to that platform. The argument is then not there that they could bring today and saying, well, if I use the CHMI, I've got these features and I haven't got them via my CFSP or via B2B. So, you know, that has a benefit. Plus, of course, you only have to do the development once. I mean, our own architecture is like that, so there's nothing that our apps can't do that our users can't do via API. And it's a fundamental decision, so I'd encourage NM to take that bold step and make that announcement for their architecture and say, no, it's going to be, everybody's going to have the same APIs, and our tools are not going to be better than your tools, or worse for that matter, because we all have the same access. So anyway, that would be my request, suggestion, and recommendation.
So thank you for that, Uwe, and I think we'll be able to go into more details when we are at the workshop in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. Jean-Pierre? Yes, please.
I would like to go back to the first presentation, I think the first or the second, where you mentioned that the e-help desk will have some changes, also in the prioritization, which was taught in the standout site. In the NM23, we see that the slot extension can also be requested by a DPI. So I was wondering if you can tell me more about the prioritization between ATC, DPI, or a phone call, or whatsoever.
First of all, I speak, then Juan can give the technical answer. The prioritization will be for the FMPs, of course. They will have anyway the priority, because anyway any request from FMP can be also impacting safety. Regarding the prioritization of the other requests coming from the aircraft operator, I leave Juan the answer.
In which concerns the help desk and B2B, there will be a rational way to present the request based on actor, based on type of request, and then based on different parameters, either on delay or on CTOT proximity, for example. The case of the information which is sent from CDM airports via DPI is not processed, and that's part of the fragmentation we are discussing those days that we are trying to solve. That information is not processed directly on the help desk service reception in that, is processed on the ETFMS, so directly on the backend, which is used for the flow part on the HMI. So the request from the CDM airport will come directly where other DCB requests, like regulations, are requested to NM. So it follows a slightly different flow, if that answers your question. Just one thing, of course, in the future, the intention is, as I mentioned before, to merge any DCB exchange in one single channel, including, no matter if we talk about one regulation, one flight request, and then we will reorganize again that queue in a rational way. This is not the case today, that should be the case in the future.
Okay, so you cannot really conclude that the slot extension, which is requested by a DPI, will have a lower priority than one in the e-help desk right now from ATC.
It will not have a lower priority, that's for sure.
Hello, Harris from Austria, Vienna. If I understood you correct, you said calculation of CTOT is done TUBT plus taxi time. But how do you take into consideration the target takeoff time? That means the airport capacity.
That's a question for the performance change.
No, just I heard before, CTOT calculation is TUBT plus taxi time, or did I misunderstand it?
ETFMS will, in case a flight is regulated with a CTOT, there are situations where DPIS information, so sequence information from the tower, falls out of the window of the slot, and that, of course, triggers a recomputation. So what we were describing before, together with Jed, is how the delay which is accumulated due to this new recomputation will be assessed in the new CTOT, so, or with the new CTOT. But the processing is the same in any case. If a TDPIS, the TTOT, the target time, falls out, there will be a normal recalculation of the system.
I see no questions at the moment. We have a few cards. So there's one question which is less on the operational side, but a more generic one is how many centers have a post-ops unit? And do you check if the decisions you made were correct? So I suppose that goes a little bit more to the ANSPs. I open the floor.
Meanwhile, you think whether to answer or not. So we have our own post-ops, of course, and is fed by the feedback of the guys who work in the ops room, together with a well-organized post-operation section. So we do know why certain things are done, sometimes not, because sometimes it's not really explainable, the decision that is taken, but the outcome, of course, may be quite bad. And there is a major weakness that we have, and I confess it without any problem. It's very difficult to replay the day following that decision and assessing whether that decision in certain case was the right one. We don't have a replay system. Maybe that for the next architecture study, maybe we can do that, replaying moment by moment in a quick way, and then we can see whether. There are certain occasions where we do know that decision that was taken was completely wrong, and then we try to escalate with the proper, we don't escalate with the post-ops in the NSP, we do escalate with the head of operations. So, and quite often, or Chris Peregrine does it, or I do it directly. So now, if you decided to answer, please.
Aro, please.
First of all, before answering, can you repeat the question? I'm not sure I've understood everything correctly, but listening to Gianni answer, I think I can answer partly, but can you repeat the question, please?
Pleasure, of course. So the question, it was actually two questions. So the first one is how many centers do have a post-ops unit, a dedicated unit? So that's referring to what Gianni said. We in NM, we have a dedicated unit within the NMOC. And the question is, do the ANSPs have something equivalent for their centers? And the second one is basically what Gianni also mentioned, is do you check if the decisions that you have taken on the day of operations were the correct one? So that, which would be a task for the post-ops. Yeah.
So as an answer, not yet. We don't have any specific post-ops unit, but we have a unit that is doing strategic ATFM and working with FMP, and we have a project of developing the post-ops and doing it. We have technical difficulties, and my FMP is going to shout at me due to the technical difficulties I imposed to them, but but we're working on it, and we want to begin that summer, not the most difficult technical part, but the first, I would say, first analyze at what we have done previous week, what type of regulation were implemented, did it work well, and what do you think we can do for it to work better? Of course, I don't promise that we will completely change our ATFM methods, but by learning of what we're doing, we hope that we'll improve our methods. And I hope next year I will answer differently that question and say, yes, we put something on the post stops. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's from the IAA. Yeah, it's up the back. Yeah, we don't actually have a dedicated post-ops unit, but however, we do have people assigned to that role. So we would actually, as a normal matter of course of our business, carry out a continuous review on actually how we operate and report pretty much on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, setup can be different. It's true. DFS, Holger?
Yeah, speaking for Karlsruhe, because this is organized locally, I must as well, I mean, the reluctancy speaks for itself. And we have people working in our flow office on post-operational things, but more event-based. And due to the situation of storing data and availability of historical data, it's a lengthy process. It's very difficult. But we expect a big increase of our possibilities with the tool that Jed mentioned yesterday, and what we are going to see in the coming months.
Thank you. Yes, Johnny, please.
Actually, it was a very good question, because to be honest with you, I never thought about it. But post-operations is the fourth phase of flow management then at the end. Strategic, pre-tactical, tactical, and post-op that then closes the loop and feeds the strategic in order to fix. That's what we do normally. For us, it is a normal operation. Pity that Chris Peregrine is not here, he's the head of the post-operation. But most of the things that come out, particularly for events, or go to the strategic then organization, to John Wall and the other guys over there in order to implement the lessons learned on each event. We did that for Erato, for many other things, for many other events. Instead, the incidents that are reported by aircraft operators or ANSPs on procedures, on system behavior, everything then comes to our incidents that are embedded into the three domains. Then it comes to me, and then we try to fix together with NTS if it is a technical change is necessary, or a procedural one via the domain manager. So it's something that actually works correctly. And so I'm not surprised to see that it's not implemented fully in many NSPs, but again, maybe this can be one of the messages that can be addressed. Of course, it does not depend on us. We don't pay the controllers, your controllers. It's up to you to make expenditure, but this can be one of the good messages. So thanks to who made the question.
It actually came from Minik, huh?
Gianni, it was me who asked the question. Sorry.
That's why it's clever.
Wow, lovely. I wanted to. We all have ego inside. The reason I ask, because again, when we were talking yesterday and today and during our visits last year, I was asking the decisions made by ACC supervisor or FMP manager to apply a certain measure in the cases against the advice given by us, or in the cases a practice that we normally don't use and it's used locally and it's imposed on the network type of thing. I asked the question, do you go back and check the efficiency of this technique, measure, and this decision? And in two cases, the answer was no. In one case, it was regulations applied based on occupancy counts, very short time of application, which needed to be extended frequently afterwards, as we saw in the statistics. So I asked, how does it work for you? Did you do your post-ops? Is it efficient? How are your counts? Because occupancy is a snapshot of the counts. You are acting on that snapshot, but what was the reality? And the answer was, it was never checked, because the feeling was in the ops room, the feeling was that it was helping. I mean, it was surprising but not surprising, because I want to share with you here that we received regulation requests throughout the summer last year, where we said, you don't need this. Based on what we see, it's not necessary. The answer was, it helps psychologically. So then I feel the urge to ask everybody here, we take decisions based on local constraints, complications, complexities of staffing, resources, or anything, the flows, which we may not know. But I think it's essential to go back and see if these decisions were really efficient locally and impact-wise on the network. I think it's going to be a good lessons learned. If you have a local technique, you could even further develop into something much more efficient. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Holger, please.
I just would like to add, I just mentioned it already, the main problem that we are facing right now in post-operational analysis is the lack of availability of historical data. So it's very difficult for us if we don't collect the data at the time and store it. An immense amount of data on local storage, then we cannot we cannot get to the point where we see yesterday at 12 o'clock what was the picture when somebody made a decision. So this is why, I mean, we are in the process of thinking about something. We are very thankful for a solution that is coming from your side. And I think a better solution is that every ANSP is starting to grab all the data via B2B and store the same picture. But probably this is what is starting to happen right now.
We have exactly the same issue, and it's all manual, so it's a bit difficult.
Okay, thank you very much for the feedback, for the honest feedback. I have a nice last one card. It's just a statement. It's not from us. It says, give more power to NM to manage all sectors accountable. So, no, to make all actors accountable. Sorry, I have to be precise. So, food for thought, I would say. There is a number of more. We're still discussing on how to display. I mean, we had a bunch of cards. We didn't read them out all, but I think we will find a way to make them at least visible to you and see where we can provide some answers after the meeting. So I hand back to Ken for a summary. Thank you.